Ludwig, where were you born and when were you born?
Okay. I was born in Romania, a small village called Luna.
Luna?
Yes, Luna.
Okay. Okay. And when were you born? When was your...
In 1930, 30.
Okay.
It is 76 years old today, or 2 weeks, 2 months ago.
Oh, okay. And Ludwig, you remember your parents?
Sure, I remember.
Okay, what was your father's name?
Jacob.
Jacob. And what did Jacob do for a living?
Okay, we have been in a small village, and he had a grocery store and a small pub, you know, that people used to come and have a drink there.
Oh, okay. And what was your mother's name?
Hannah.
Hannah. And what did she do?
She was a
A housewife.
Housewife and helping out in the store, and you know.
Right. And how many children were there?
We have been 4, 2 brothers and 2 sisters.
Okay, okay. Now, when you were little, Ludwig, did you live in a house or an apartment?
Oh, we lived in a house, which was also the front was the store, the grocery store.
The front of the house. So you lived in the back of the grocery store.
That's correct. But it was the only brick stone house in the village.
Right. Well, I guess you didn't get hungry living in the back of a grocery store.
No.
Right, okay. And did you have your own bedroom?
No, I don't think we had. We had maybe the 2 boys in one room and the 2 girls in the other room, but not...
Right. Now, did you also have, like, land around your property, or...?
No, not in this particular place. I can tell you now, my father had a kosher home, so we kept cows with some peasants that helped out, so she had milk and cheese and all this to be able to supply kosher milk and cheese.
Oh, so how many cows did you have?
Maybe 6 or 7, I don't remember exactly.
And was that mostly for the store?
No, it was for our own consumption.
Well, that's a lot of milk for a family to drink.
He maybe sold the rest of it, I don't remember.
Right. Did you have any other animals, like chickens or anything?
No.
No, okay. Now, when you were little, Ludwig, were you very religious?
My father was definitely kosher in Shabbos clothes. So I can now connect with this. I want to tell you that in 1933, the Romania started to be very anti-Semitism started to grow. And the peasants from the village, the younger people started knocking on the doors nighttime. They wanted to have drinks, so they woke up my father and all this. And later they wanted to force him to open on Shabbat, which before he never opened on Shabbat.
Right.
So in 1934, the parents had to decide to move. We moved out from this village to another village, which is called Weisz.
Okay.
And that village was a bigger Jewish community. There was a rabbi, there was a shul, and it was much more controlled by the police, so we never had any problem with anti-Semitism there.
Right. Now, in the new village, did you also have a pub in the new village?
Yes, that's exactly the only thing that this time it was leased. Not a restaurant, a small pub and the grocery store.
Oh, so you didn't own it, you mean? You didn't own...
Didn't own it.
Right.
And, my father had there also a brewing from the grapes when they were left over. You know, you squeeze out the grapes, they were boiling and making...
wine?
Not a wine, he made for his own kosher wine.
Right.
And they put it in the basement. But for people who wanted to have a sharp drink, it's like a tsuika it's called, you know, that you boil it and then cool it down through a cooler.
Right.
That was in the backyard.
Okay. Now, was he a man who had a hat and a beard and a hat?
Not a beard, no. He had a hat definitely, but not a beard.
Not a beard. Okay. And so then you moved, and you were in the second place up until the war, right?
That's exactly. That was the only quiet time from 1934 to 1940, reasonably quiet. And then started the problems.
Right. Now, when you were a kid, Ludwig, were you what kind of kid were you? Were you a good athlete? Were you a smart kid?
No, we we went to Cheder, first to the school, which was a public school, and then in the afternoon we went to a Cheder. There were only 4 kids there, but we had a teacher, Malama, they used to call it,
right.
Malama, that was teaching us Chimish and all this stuff. And
right, you were good in school though, right?
I definitely was good in school. Then we went to school, once
right.
I could go to school.
Right. Now, did you play any sports?
No, I don't remember. Only what I used to make, handmade ice skates. We used to make in winter time ice skating on the river.
Really? So what did...
Sport I will tell you later when I reach to actually sport in the team.
Right. Okay. Now, how tall are you?
6'2".
So you were pretty tall back then.
Definitely.
You were about the tallest guy around, right?
And I was so skinny during the war that they could see all my ribs.
Right. So were you the tallest one in your family?
Yes.
Right. And you didn't play any basketball when you were little?
At that time, I don't think there was basketball, and everybody played soccer with just rag balls, metal
right.
balls, and kick the ball. That was the only really in the village any sport.
Right. Now, Ludwig, do you remember your grandparents at all?
No, I remember my grandmother, yes. I remember my grandmother.
On which side?
She was from my mother's mother.
Do you remember her name?
Yes, Golda, sure, I remember.
Golda? And do you remember anything about her?
I can tell you what I remember. She used to come in the summer in 1936, 38, and she took me to another uncle in another city for vacation, summertime,
Right.
And when I went into this my uncle actually, and cousins there.
What was your uncle's name?
Polak, Gedalia.
Right.
And she introduced me to the family to watch out because this boy is a gunner. You know what's a gunner? And that was what was the gunner, that I went in the store and I took 2 lays at that time to buy ice cream on Shabbat. So it was never minded too late, but it was a Shabbos and I took money and I went to buy myself an ice cream,
Right.
So that was the introduction she did for me.
Oh, so your grandmother, yeah.
Yeah, she came there, and she was almuna with 9 children. My mother used to be 9 brothers and sisters.
Really?
And
wow.
Then I can tell you how many of them really disappeared in the Holocaust. But you want to continue from my story, or I will tell you the...
You can tell me that now.
Okay. They have been, Transylvania was divided. If you know, Romania has Transylvania, which is the northern part of Romania.
Right.
And in 1940, with some Germans, agreed to divide half of Romania, of Transylvania, stayed with Romania, and half with the Hungarians.
Right.
And on the Hungarian side, which all my uncles and aunts lived with their families, and we were the only family that we stayed on the Romanian side.
Right.
And all the others have been in the northern part, which was the Hungarian side.
Right.
And in 1944, they collected all of them, and they all went to Auschwitz. And only one uncle survived he went to a labor camp, and then they ran away. They were hiding in the mountains, and he survived.
Right.
And one uncle in Israel that was already from 94, he survived, and all the rest of them with the children.
None of the children survived?
No, I have from one of them, the same Polak which I told you, they survived, 4 of them.
Really?
4 children survived from them.
Right.
They have been also with some 9 or 10 children, but 4 of them, the elderly, they survived.
Right. Now, when you were little, Ludwig, how did you get around mostly? On foot or bicycle, horse and buggy, tram?
No, it was we live in this bigger village. There was we walked to school and we walked on the street. There was no bicycles and all this thing. It's not, there was nothing special. We walked all the time, or the only vacation was climbing somewhere on the mountains, or even I went even to work in the summer when there was no school to collect harvest grain,
Right.
And then it was just to get some exercise to see how people were living on the field. And used to walk to the fields and walk back home, and then at the end of the week they pay you with some grain, and you had to carry it on your shoulder back.
Right. Do you ever remember being in an automobile before the war?
In the automobile? I don't really remember if we have been in an automobile, no. At that time, cars in 1930s was a big thing there. When we saw a car, we were running after the car, like
right.
the taxi. It was a big thing.
Right.
We maybe went with a bus, we went to another city, then we went by bus, or I went by train to
right.
to my uncles there, traveled.
Did you have a radio at home?
Yes, this we have the radio.
Oh, okay.
The radio, and it was working on batteries, no electricity.
So you had no electricity at home?
No.
Right. And what languages did you speak?
Oh, home with my father, and this was all Yiddish. And then on the streets, we went to Romanian school. We learned Romanian, but on the most of the kids were Hungarian, so they had to speak Hungarian and Romanian. And home we spoke Yiddish.
Okay. Right. Now, do you remember anti-Semitism before the war?
It was anti-Semitism, but in that second city, village we went, it was less than the first place we were.
Right.
And all the Christians there, Hungarian, Romania, they were permanent customers in our store. And then my father had a book, and they always writing they were buying on credit, and then when they got paid, they came and paid end of the week, and paid. Some of them paid, some of them didn't pay, but that was the way living was.
Right. Were you ever called names, or did you ever get in a fight because you were Jewish?
Very, very, very seldom, not too much really. In that first village, there it was very strong anti-Semitism.
Well, you were very little, so you can't remember too much about anti-Semitism.
No.
At that time, right? Okay. So, anything else you remember before the war that's important? That you.
Like before the war.
Yeah. That's interesting or important.
I can tell you that my father, being a Shomer Shabbat,
Right.
he had to walk 6 kilometers to a synagogue.
Wow.
In another village, there was no synagogue. So,
right.
And then, if it was a holiday, he slept over in some other friends or family, so he didn't have to walk home and come again.
Really?
And he was very supportive of the synagogue, naturally, and very strict kosher home. And I didn't go yet at that time to walk, but that was his system, that to keep a kosher home and to go to synagogue. And if there was some bar mitzvah somewhere in the family, then we used to take a horse carriage and, stay to walk and go all the family to attend some ceremony. The bar mitzvah or wedding.
Right. So it sounds like your father put a lot of emphasis on keeping to his values.
His values, yes.
Right. Okay. Now, when did things start to get bad?
In 1940, my mother actually always had good relations with the chief of the police. He used to come, he got free drinks, in our store. And he was told us all the time what development is going on in the world, and we always hoped it will never reach to our place.
Right. Do you remember his name?
His name of the policeman? No, I don't.
Right. Okay.
I was
right.
9 years, 10 years old.
Right. Okay.
But I know only from this that he used to come and the story, and he was telling us that things are happening with Germany, with occupying, Czechoslovakia and all this. And then one day he came, he said nothing else, he got instructions to collect all the Jews from the village, and we had to walk to another city with belongings, what we could carry, like personnel and some blankets and sheets, with us.
Right.
And this city was called Turda, T-U-R-D-A. That was already over 100,000 people city.
Right.
This was the regional city, and the decision was made that all the Jews from all the villages to be collected in this city. And it was, again, an old factory. They made like a ghetto there. We all went there, and we had to sleep on the floor.
Now, who went? Your whole family?
The whole family, yeah. We walked. This is about 10 kilometers from this place. 10
Really?
6 miles or whatever.
Right.
So we all took whatever we could take. We went there and we put down the blankets, whatever it was, and we slept on the floor. But the Jewish population of the city stayed in their home. Only the ones from the regional villages were being collected. So what happened, we got support from those people in the city, from the Jewish community.
Right.
Supplied us with food and, things that were needed there. And the only thing between other ghetto and this ghetto was that because the Jewish population was free, they let us go to find some work and get some income and to make a living. They didn't supply us food over there.
So you were allowed out of the ghetto?
Yes.
Or was the ghetto surrounded by a wall or anything? Or?
Yeah, just a yard, but they let us go out, and actually the Jewish community tried to give us work. I was 11 years old, and I was going with a horse and carried soda, seltzer bottles, filling them in. If somebody had a small seltzer factory, used to fill up the bottles and go and distribute them to his usual customers.
Right. Now, at this time, were you wearing a star or an armband?
No star, but over there they didn't allow us anymore, the Jews, to go to school. So the school completely stopped. We had some education in the shul. Some of the Jewish teachers gave us they collected the first grades in the morning and then the 5 and 6 and 7 in the evening for an hour. Some education what they could give us. But no public schools were allowed for Jews.
Really? So nothing?
And this was for a while going on until my mother went to wash laundry for somebody else, and my older sister and my father ourselves, we went any work that we could find to get some income and leave this ghetto. And I was sweeping streets. There was everybody from the city had to make some days to work for the public city. So instead they should go, they were hiring people to do the job for them.
Right.
So either we were digging trenches or cleaning the streets. And we made enough income that we rented a one room with no water inside, no electricity, 6 people. My parents had a bed and we were sleeping on the floor all around the bed.
Right.
The toilets and a well was in the backyard, so we had to take a bucket of water. And this way we managed to at least to be on the recover.
Right.
And this place in Turda, we stayed like this until in August, end of August, the Russian army occupied the city, and all the Germans retreated, run away. And at that time we even have still some problems because the Russian on the front, they were allowed anything, when they were fighting there for 2 months, they were drinking anything, raping women and all this, until we found an officer, happened to be a Jewish guy, a Russian.
Right.
He told us if you want to have quiet, you have to go back 30 kilometers, about 20 miles there. They are not allowed to do anything. On the front line, any soldier can do whatever he wants. So we packed up again something on a 2-wheel with a horse, and we went back from the front. One way all the refugees, and the other way the Russian army was. On the way, just the light side, the Russian horses couldn't go anymore, so they took our horse and they gave us a horse that couldn't stand on his feet. But we managed to get some. My mother and younger sister, all of them, I stayed with my father. and they managed to get a tramp, they call it, just jump on a military truck, and they took them back to a barn, and there they were sitting for about a few months until the front.
Well, who was sitting?
All the family, my mother and the two sisters and the brother, and we came later because we didn't have, I had that horse with that carriage, with two-wheel carriage to come to the same place later.
Right.
And we paid somebody in a village to let us sleep in the barn.
Right.
So we stayed there until the front really moved further north.
Right.
Then we came back to the city for a while, and at that time we found out already that all the families from the North Transylvania, they were taken to Auschwitz.
Oh.
And
did you know what that meant?
yeah, I mean, we knew that we didn't know any survivors yet. There was no communication, at that time, no phones. So the family decided again that we purchase a, how do you call it, a carriage with two horses. We packed up whatever still left with us, and we went north to see all the family. My mother had 3 sisters and brothers, and they all had big children. And this is a city called Baia Mare. It's like B-A-I-A-M-A-R-A. And this is in Transylvania. And there we couldn't find anybody except one of the brothers of my mother who was in a labor camp, and they ran away.
Right.
He was the only one that came back. And slowly, while we were, this was in end of 44.
Right.
December 44, some of my 2 cousins came, and then another 3 cousins came back. So suddenly we had 5 cousins, but not their parents.
Right.
Young, 18, 17 years old. And from all the parents, none of them came back.
Really? Wow. That's really unbelievable that your whole family.
Yeah, the whole family, and they were big families there.
Right.
And then we settled in this city. We actually got one of my uncle's home to stay there. And we were waiting to see maybe somebody coming back.
Right.
To add to the story also, we had a 9-year-old and 13-year-old orphans that the parents, his father was killed by some anti-Semitism there, and the mother was with 2 kids. She went to Budapest, and one day she disappeared. She never knows, so they both left with no parents in Budapest. In end of 44, the old brother, this my cousin, which he was at that time 14, and a 9-year-old sister, they came by train, to this city.
Right.
And they came in, and when they saw my mother, they thought that this is their mother. It was so similar.
Right.
And I even can tell you what a meeting that was, that I realized that is not his mother,
Oh.
But they are all okay. We took them in our family, and they grew up together with us.
Really? So that was you must have had very special parents to do something like that.
They all stayed with us, and my mother took care to get married. One of them, the boy, and then take care of the girl. She was only 9-year-old, and she got married there in Romania.
Are they still living today?
They are still living in Israel, yes.
Really?
Yes, both of them.
Right.
We are still in contact with them naturally.
And what are their names?
Fligman, the last name is Fligman.
Right.
Jacob, the boy, and Judith is
right.
his sister.
Right. Wow. So
this is the story with how it went through the war, and I myself, if you want to continue, I first started working with one of the brothers-in-law of mother that he had a jewelry store. He wanted to teach me to be a watchmaker. You know,
Right. When is this? In what year?
In 45.
Right.
This city, northern Transylvania. But at that time, even to be a watchmaker was not a big, profession so much. They found out that in Cluj, which is the biggest city in Transylvania, Klosenburg, if you heard about it, it's a very big city. The Jewish Federation opened a home for young Jewish survivors.
Right.
Between 14 to 18 years old. We were almost, and then my parents decided it will be much better for me there because ORT organization opened a school to get general education and mechanical, whoever wanted to be, carpenters or professionals.
Right.
So I went to that city with my cousin, which I just told you, Fligman.
Right.
And both, and he stayed with jewelry. He became a, how they call it, fixing jewelry. So
like, did you work with watches or?
Yes. I mean, in a store to fix watches and sell
right.
Stuff. But
now, after the war, did you see a lot of strange jewelry? Because what happened during the war. Did people sometimes come in with large amounts of jewelry?
No, I don't know so much in the store because again I was there only for maybe 6 months, and then I went to that big city in Cluj.
Right.
And I signed in to learn mechanical engineering.
And remember, you're only about 15, 16 years old.
Yes.
And you've gone through all this at that time.
That's right. I mean, till now you could see what it was. Anyway, I can go back and tell you things during this years in Turda that we didn't have anything to eat or income. The war was there. You could see the Russian planes bombarding. One of the Germans took my sister one day to the city, and he just went through a shop, the main store in the city, and he told her, whatever you want, carry. So what they took a roll of material, shirt material, whatever it was.
Right.
Came home, and then we could cut pieces and exchange it for a chicken, for eggs, and there was no money. The money was not worth anything during this time.
Right.
And I had to go. Sometime I went in a cigarette factory, and I took a roll of cigarette paper from which the factory was destroyed, bombarded.
Right.
From those cigarette papers, we could make so much things that we could get food, not for us only, but for the horses. When I told you we bought these horses and we went on a horse carriage to this other city.
Right.
It was a very big item because people had the tobacco, but they didn't have the cigarette papers to roll the cigarettes. And we were digging trenches, and we had a lot of injured. The Germans were running away from the bombarding. They left all their injured people on the backyard until they were bleeding to death. They didn't bother with each other at that time. Now we go back to that city and the ORT organization, which I will always be thankful for them because I learned their engineering. And you ask about sport. I was 6'2" and skinny, and I played basketball in a local factory team. There was a shoe factory in the city.
Right.
And they took me, and I played center. I was not that good anyway, but I know that if you played between other cities competition,
right.
Professional. Not professional, just amateur thing. Then in 1948, I was there from 95 to 1948, 3 years.
Right.
I signed up to emigrate to Israel. And
now, during that time, you were running into all these people who had come back from the camps, right?
Yes, when in this place in Cluj, in the city, there were 400 young girls and boys And the Jewish Federation, I don't know from where, from U.S. or from where, they were supplying food, and we got there a hot meal every day. And
Right, but weren't you asking them questions about what happened to them during the war? I mean, you never saw a concentration camp yourself.
no,
So, you know, did they tell you what happened to them, what these places were about?
I mean, those people that came back, you know, and we met as cousins, not only they were telling stories that one of my mother's brothers survived with him together from the same in Bergen-Belsen. But after the war, they were jumping on the food, and he died there after a week after the liberation.
Right.
So we knew exactly what the concentration camp was.
I mean, you knew about gas chambers and...
Sure, because they have been in Auschwitz, and from Auschwitz they took them to labor camps, and they reached to Bergen-Belsen or Dachau, whatever it was.
Right. So, did you believe all these stories in the beginning?
I mean, sure, we had to believe because we knew that they didn't came back, you know, and we were waiting to see them coming back.
Right.
And like I told you, we had those 4 cousins, and then those 2 young that came stayed with us.
You know, during the war, did you see yourself? Did you see a lot of Jews that were killed yourself, or no?
No.
Yeah.
Even though in some places there were pogroms in the Romania, in the villages,
Right.
Not far from us, they decided to execute some 120 Jews. They made mass graves, and they just shot them.
Right. And were you ever really, you know, like almost starving during the war?
During the war, it was almost starving because there was nothing we didn't have anything to buy, with what to buy, and was nothing available. It's only the farmers that used to come in the city, and you try to buy something from them. There was no stores, no grocery stores. And if we got a chicken, we divided for 12 pieces, you know, or something like this. And a bread, you had to buy flour. I can tell you how we survived another story, which is maybe more also interesting.
Go ahead.
I was 12 years old, and I told you in the beginning that my father used to give him credit, and he had a book.
Right.
I took on my shoulder a bag, on both sides from material made, and I went back to the village, which was not allowed to leave the city by the authorities. But
right.
Being with 12-year-old, nobody cared. I just walked 6 miles to the village, and I told some of them, I had a list of people that they never paid their what they purchased from the grocery store.
Right.
And I told them if they can help out with something, at least if not money or anything, but some grain or flour or all this. So I went from one to the second to the third, and they all put in maybe 1 gallon of flour, and the other had corn flour. And I was lucky enough that they put so much in the bag that I couldn't carry them anymore.
Really?
And one of our neighbors then decided that he's going to take me back to the city with the flour, you know.
Right.
And very seldom you see this from the non-Jews.
Right.
As a sympathy, but my father was very much liked there, and they were ready to give me even more.
Your mother could bake?
Yeah, she could bake bread, or even for Kiddush. My father was insisting even on this. We didn't have anything but to have a piece of lekach and Kiddush on Shabbos. You know,
right.
A place like this.
Now, your father was a very religious man.
Yes.
Are you religious today?
No.
Right.
We are not. We are not. I mean, we are members in the synagogue, and we go to the holidays in the synagogue. I make yurtzat, but not. We don't have ham home, or also, you know, all those things, but we try to keep milk and meat separate as the way we were used home.
Right. Okay. Okay. And then what happened?
No, in 1948, I emigrated to Israel.
Oh, now, did you emigrate by yourself?
Yes, only by myself.
So the rest of your family, they were where?
They stayed all back in Romania.
Right.
And in 1948, December, we came with 2 ships that loaded in Constanța, in the harbor of Romanian harbor. There was 5,000 people on a small cargo ship, with one on top, made specially. All the hold was built up with bunks.
Right.
And it took only 4 days.
Now, how did your father feel about this?
Okay, he wanted at that time, he started already Zionist organizations organizing, all kinds of people to come to Israel. And there was talking about independence already at that time. And actually our ships were the first that we were allowed to come straight to Israel. Before that, if you heard about the British were taking everybody to Cyprus.
Right.
And they didn't allow the Jews to come to Israel in 1947, 48. They stopped all the ships. But in 1948, end of the year, when the Declaration of Independence won, so the ships came straight to Israel.
Right.
So naturally, I was tall and skinny, and from the ship straight with a big cargo, with a truck, we took us straight to the army. So I knew that we have an uncle in Israel, and an aunt in Haifa harbor, and I was telling them I want to see them, to visit them. Or that. They said, you will have plenty time. Now we go straight into the recruiting place. And over there, they did medical checkups, and they told me, you are so skinny, you better go and do some medical checkups.
Right.
Because before, all others went straight to the units. So they took a blood test, and I fainted there. And so they gave me to go to do some more checks in Haifa, and at that time I could visit my aunt there, which is a few days.
Right. What was her name?
Her name is Sherman, Rachel Sherman.
Right.
And then I went back to the unit. I had to, and enlisted back to the army.
Right.
And they sent me straight to a unit down in southern Israel. I don't have to mention the name of again, but
right.
And again there, because first of all, everybody could make at least training. As maybe you know from the history, there was not too much time to train.
Right.
So I was lucky. For 6 weeks, we were training how to shoot a rifle, or something like this.
Right. And you didn't have any friends there?
No friends. Nobody in the army.
So you so you were there pretty much all by yourself.
By myself, yes. Nobody. And again, because I was tall and skinny, they recommended I should go to work in the kitchen for a while. So
right.
Gain some weight.
Right.
Which I did. We were cooking for the units. And the first assignment was on this famous Gaza Strip there.
Right. So you got married?
Yes, I got married in Israel.
Did you marry a survivor, or?
Yes. She went through all the hell in Germany, in concentration camps and all this.
Right.
And we met in a...
Wait, hold on. Okay, so you got married?
We got married in 1952 after I finished the army.
Right.
And I met my wife on a wedding of my friend, that I was the photographer. I had an old Russian Leica camera, and I used to make the pictures, so I was there on the wedding.
Right.
And she was, after I finished the army, I went to work for a refinery as an engineer.
Right.
And this way another occasion I met my future wife, and in 1953 we got married.
Right. And what was your wedding like?
You want to know? I will tell you. My wife had to borrow a dress from somebody. I borrowed a suit from a cousin's husband, a hat. And the wedding was on my wife's brother's backyard. And we had about 30 people.
Right.
Some from her army, some of my relatives, the relatives which we had in Israel.
Right.
And again, at that time in Israel, there was rationing, if you remember. In Israel, after the war, we got so much. But the army supplied her with some cakes and cookies. And it was very hot, dry May 13 of the 53, was so hot that all the cake dried out. So it was not much of a ceremony, but we had the rabbi, we did the wedding, and now came the struggle again with in Israel.
Now, where was your wife from?
Originally from Czechoslovakia, which at that time was Czechoslovakia, and today it's Ukraine.
Right. Did she lose a lot of her family in the war?
Definitely.
Right.
Brothers and sisters and their parents. This is another story.
Right. Okay. So then what happened after you got married?
We got married, and I went to work in a refinery as a maintenance department. The engineering that I learned in Ort helped her a lot.
Right.
My wife finished the army. She went to work as also a telephone operator as a civilian for the army.
Right.
Until she got pregnant, and then after she got pregnant, she stopped working. And now housing in Israel was another story. We found an old, neglected Arab house with just concrete floor with a hole in the end that you put a bucket of water. It was running out from the other end.
Right.
But we managed to fix it more or less, and there was born our daughter Ilana, the first born.
Right.
And after a while, because there was no road to get there, had to carry everything, ice and milk and everything on the steps. It was very dangerous, so we went to another small village not far from Haifa, and we rented a one-room, just a one-room, which was kitchen and a small bathroom on the side.
Right.
I could afford it from my salary from the refinery, and we stayed there. And over there, in 1958, our son was born.
Oh, Mazel Tov.
Eliezer. So, working in a refinery, in the conditions to be able to purchase an apartment or anything, a housing, was never available from one salary. And being an engineer, somebody offered me to go to work on a ship as an engineer.
Right.
So I went to work as a cadet, they called it in the beginning.
Right.
I managed to go slowly from one grade to another, second engineer, then first engineer. And I went to school in between, to engineering school in Akko. This is Merchant Marine Engineering School. And I passed all the examination to chief engineer.
Right.
I sailed for 4 years on Israeli shipping company on different ships. And in 1968, they transferred me to New York to operate vessels that call the U.S. or any other part of the world.
Right.
And this way, I slowly, with the children, came here, and we all settled in Queens in New York.
Right. Now, why did you come to America?
I tell you, because I didn't want to go on the ships anymore and to leave my wife with the two children all the time. Sometimes it took 2-3 months on the ship. And then the company decided that they could use my experience to be a supervisor on ships. They call it as port engineers. Whenever a ship came into the U.S., we could handle the crew, supplies, maintenance, repairs.
Right. And how did you come here?
You mean by plane? I mean,
you came by plane, so you didn't come by boat.
No, you came by plane.
And at that time, you had one child?
2 already.
2, a boy and a girl, or?
Yes, a girl and a boy. Yes.
Right. Mazel Tov. So when you came here, did you speak English?
I spoke enough English. Again, in school there, I passed all the examination in engineering. The only thing I failed spelling, English spelling. So,
right.
But it was no problem. I spoke enough. My daughter was already, what time, in 68. She was 14, 15, and they learn already English in school. She went to a school in Haifa, and they learned English over there. Our son was 9-year-old. He didn't know a single word in English. But he went in Queens to public school, and he picked up quite good.
Really? Now, when you came here, what did you do?
Okay, we rented an apartment in Rigo Park.
Right, yep.
and I went to work in the city, to the office every day. And I had to go sometime every place in the world, in Korea and Japan and Singapore or Germany, wherever the ships did repairs to attend, and I represented our company there.
Right.
And this way we managed to buy a unit in Queens condominium.
Oh, okay.
So we left the rented place and we had an attached townhouse in Woodhaven.
Right.
And
did your wife, did she work at all?
no, she didn't work in the States at all.
Did she learn English?
Yeah, sure. She reads and writes with mistakes. She never learned actually to write, but she reads all the English newspapers and magazines, Reader's Digest. So this was a part of the company here, that Israeli shipping company. I worked there for 40 years.
Really?
Even after retirement for additional as consultant for 5 years. After I retired, I attended different ships in Brazil, and Korea, any place. And I became assistant vice president.
Really?
From a biggest public shipping company in the world.
So that's really amazing.
An officer of the company.
Right.
So I really appreciate all the opportunities I had from ORT or from the Jewish Federation or from America, from everyone.
Yeah, I mean, you left Europe and you really had nothing.
That's right.
Right.
We came here with nothing. I mean, when I came from Israel, it was also, I am not complaining.
So when you came to America, how much money did you have?
No, I don't know, maybe $100 or $1,000. I don't know.
Something very small like
Very
that.
small, because we purchased an apartment in Israel and we had to pay mortgages, on it. And I kept the apartment because we used it every year. We went back to visit our family, so we had to stay there.
Right.
Until one day we sold it because it was very close to a Arab neighborhood in Haifa. It was all the Arabs purchased most of the units there.
Right. Now, did your children both go to college?
Oh yes, definitely. Not only they went to college, they are finished master degrees in education. My daughter, our son finished master degree in St. John in finance and economics, and they all were involved. Both got married here. And
so you have some grandchildren, or?
yes, we have 5 of them.
Oh, Mazel Tov.
Thank you.
Right.
And our daughter naturally was involved with children of the Holocaust survivors, and our son-in-law was involved with the building of the Holocaust Memorial in Washington, if you are familiar
Yeah.
with it. If you know all the Daniel story, that young boy, when you just go in on a separate section, he arranged all this
Really?
Daniel story.
Right.
He worked there for a few years.
Right.
So,
Now,
yes,
did you tell your children what happened to you when they were little?
no, I want to tell you that they knew that we have been in Europe, and it was, but my wife, just last year, the first time, she was ready to tell the story to our grandson. We have a grandson, he's 26 years old now.
Right.
And he recorded my wife, and she told them that all the years she didn't want to tell them, to keep them sad, so she only decided now to record her story.
Oh, so that...
And
How did she feel after she told her story?
it's very bad, because even now when I mention something, she doesn't want it all the years to record, because the memories come back, and it's very, very difficult memories.
Right. But it's also important memories because, all her relatives who are up in heaven, they're looking down on her, and they want her to say what happened.
Yeah, so
Because, they don't want it to happen again, right?
that's exactly what the story is. And our son also is settled. He works for an Israel discount bank in Manhattan for many years, for some 16, 17 years. And he has three children. And if you want to know this, our grandson, which I just told you, he is now in Miami on Channel 6, NBC, a sport broadcaster.
Really?
So I am really happy to Nachas, you know what's Nachas?
Right. So you can see him on TV all the time?
Not all the time, because Boynton Del Rey is on the border. Deerfield Beach, they can see it in Fort Lauderdale in Miami. But
right.
West Palm Beach, only if I see him on tape or on the computer. He has a site on computer of
right.
Dolphins football team.
Right. So he's a big shot.
At the meantime, he's started. He has been already in two stations before in Ohio, and now he got a year ago his job here in Miami, and he hopes to advance. There were three of them. Now he's number 2 in the station. And
right.
Attending different games. He was just now in Arizona on the Phoenix, Arizona. They have this championship game for the college.
Right. Now this is the grandson who interviewed your.
Yes.
Right. How long an interview was that?
About 1 hour.
Right. Okay. Now, are most of your friends survivors?
Now, most of our friends here in our community, we have a few, 3 of them or 4 survivors. And in New York, when we have been, we have more or less some of them survivors. Some are friends from Israel that we work together in the shipping company, you know. And we know here a lot of people in Florida that are retired survivors also.
Right. Are you part of a survivors club, like a group?
Not officially there, but we attend, like here at some meeting. Can you hold on a second?
Sure. So you go to some survivor group meetings?
Yeah, we had just now in Boca Raton was a meeting for, they call it Europa, Café Europa, which also Tova attends, and there they are trying to find each other. Every time my wife sees somebody, she's trying to see if anybody maybe survived and never found them, you know.
Right.
She has one brother in Israel who actually is also very interesting in the point that he came to Israel in 1936 and he then volunteered to the British Brigade, the Israeli brigade that were fighting in Europe.
Right.
And he actually went after the war to look for her and found her in Europe. So,
really?
And then emigrated to Israel, and he still is 84 years old and lives in Israel. So we are connected with the family, we visit them.
Right. Now, do you feel that the Americans understand what happened to you, or no? Like,
I feel American.
Yeah, you know, when you met Americans here, not survivors, did they understand what you went through?
I tell you, some people don't want to hear because they claim that we heard already, and they don't want to hear about it. We have here in our community 700 to 1,500 people, and we make here Yom HaShoah,
right.
We light candle. They attend, but a lot of stories about it, most of them are American, 50 years old, younger generation. But I can tell you about our daughter, Ilana, that just this year, there was 60 years of the Holocaust, Yom HaShoah,
right.
in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Right.
And they live in a community which is called Carmel, Indiana, just a small city.
Right.
The mayor organized it, and he is not a Jewish mayor.
Right.
He brought from Israel, from Kibbutz Yad Mordechai, some
right.
kids to have some stories about them. But our daughter was the keynote speaker.
Really?
She took a sample from what our grandson recorded, and he compared it, teenagers today and teenagers in her time, and what she went through during the years, and how life is for teenagers today.
Right.
And how not to be indifferent regardless of race or religion and all this, and to be involved wherever you see anti-Semitism and she made a very good job that all the newspapers were next morning was all front page about this meeting there.
Really? Oh, that's good.
So this way we are trying to get involved in these things, and hopefully it will stay for future.